how like our agency as a whole is really grateful for the Starrett family and just the way that they've walked in foster care. She's an open foster mom with us and also is a nonprofit leader in Athens and beyond, really. But there's just one particular situation where one of the bio moms that Sallie and Brad, her husband, have worked with, reached out to our case manager to express gratitude for how they had partnered. And so I think just, in my mind, it's just really neat to watch people do something that they're called to really well. And we've seen that in Sallie. And I then also, as a nonprofit director, have seen her also shine in other ways. And so I'm just grateful, Sallie, for you and your family, and also just for you generously sharing information with us and being someone that people like to listen to. So thank you for being with us today and being flexible. And I'm excited to learn from you, and I know others will benefit from it too. So just passing it over to you.
Thank you. That's so kind. We love Uniting Hope. Our family does, and also BrightPaths does as well. So yeah, my name's Sallie. I work with BrightPaths, who is we are the Athens chapter of Prevent Child Abuse America and Prevent Child Abuse Georgia. So if we get really good at our job, then we don't have to have foster homes anymore because we'll just prevent any maltreatment from ever happening. I think we're a long way from that, but we are working towards it every day. So we work with families who have custody of their children. In most cases, don't yet have DFACS involvement, or if they do, it's through family preservation. And so we're working to build strong and stable families so that kids get to grow up in their homes and that they're safe in doing so. So today we're going to talk about why children experience maltreatment to begin with. So let me share my screen. And y'all are welcome to just listen and get your CEU while you eat lunch. That's great. But if you have questions or just want to add to the conversation, I know you guys all see this every day. Please jump in, interrupt. I'd love to hear from y'all too. So, all right, you should be able to see my screen. So we're going to talk about why kids are mistreated. And really what that boils down to is what are the risk factors for maltreatment? And then in terms of prevention, what are some protective factors? So my not so secret goal, let's see if I can move this, is that we would be able to understand why this is happening, but that ultimately that would build some empathy in each of us. And I know that we all probably on different days have different levels of empathy, and that from empathy, we wouldn't just kind of sit in that spot, but that we would actually be moved to action, which I know that all of y'all are. You wouldn't be on this call. You're already in some way, shape, or form acting. Okay, so as a little pre-rec, and it's, take your daughter to work day because it's the summer, so bear with me. As a little pre-rec before I say anything, I just do want to say that while we are building empathy and while we do want to understand why this is happening in families, we're not excusing any form of maltreatment. Of course, children should never be abused or neglected. We don't think that it's excusable, but we do think that by understanding and empathy that we can prevent it. So, all right, let's talk about what child abuse and neglect are. You guys know this, but there's 4 major types, at least in Georgia, as defined by law, of child abuse and neglect. There's physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. Then there's neglect, which is the failure to provide basic needs, medical treatment, all the things that you guys know. And then child endangerment, which in the state of Georgia would be like a DUI is not child abuse, but if there's a child in the car, then it could be considered that because it would be endangerment, or family or interpersonal violence in the presence of a child. Even if the child's never harmed, if the child is watching adults harm each other, then in Georgia, that could be child endangerment. So we know that in our state, there are over 160,000 cases reported every year. So probably much more than that is happening. But only 10,000 of those are substantiated, meaning either they're screened out because they're not true after investigation or because there's not enough information to investigate. The vast majority of these maltreatment cases are neglect. And then Kayla would know better than me if that 6,000 number is still accurate, but several thousand children are entering foster care in a given year in our state. All right, so what when we look at this, these are big numbers. What does that like make you feel? What does that do for you when you see 10,000 substantiated cases of abuse and neglect in our state? Feel free to come off mute or put it in the chat, but let's talk a little bit about, like, for me, it's hard to just kind of gloss over that number.
I think I'm always astounded by the percent of neglect, because I think so many people talk about the horrific abuse situations, and they are horrific. And I think sometimes it's harder for people to have empathy for that, but neglect really is making such a dent in why kids are coming into care. And that does feel like it has some pretty straightforward solutions. Sometimes it's complicated, but also there are some really clear ways that we can help families. And so I think that's always such a good reminder to me that there is so much hopeful things that are happening, or that could happen, I guess, as it relates to neglect showing up in families.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of times, especially those for our community members who don't see it every day, like we do, we think of like the stories that make the Netflix documentaries, or neglect, like somebody willfully and wantonly just not feeding their child. And that happens. I was in a meeting yesterday where there was a horrific, and like it happens, but that's not the majority of what we're seeing. Not in our homes. I don't think at Uniting Hope, and certainly not statewide. It's for the most part, it's parents who are trying their best with what they have, which makes me sad at first, because gosh, if they're trying and there's still 10,000 kids experiencing maltreatment, that's heartbreaking. But it's also really motivating for me, because if there's parents who are, for the most part, want help, want the best for their children, like we all do, then that's encouraging, because gosh, then let's help them, and let's give them the tools that they need to keep their kids safe. So we know this because that's what we see in our homes and in our agencies. But I think the general public thinks abuse and neglect, gosh, I could never do that. I would never do that to my kid. And that's really not the case. So we're going to see a little bit of that here. Okay. So I want to understand, like, why is this happening? Like we said, why would a parent allow their child to be harmed? Why would they intentionally harm their child? What are some reasons? And I am not. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So feel free to pop them in. I'll give you a couple. I know it's lunch, so a lot of people are probably eating. So I'll just give you some that we see, but feel free to pop in. Okay. So these are some of the most common reasons for why we see families, quote, allowing their children to be mistreated. Frequent crisis. It's just one thing after the next. You feel like you can never get your head above water. Right. When you save enough for, first and last to get into a decent apartment, then your car breaks down and now you've got to use that money for your car because you don't have a good car. Or, right when you, think you've got a good co-parenting relationship, something happens with that other person and now there's violence. And now I'm forced to either stay with a person who's violent or leave and not have a safe place for my kids to live. So just that frequent crisis is common. A lack of parenting knowledge. This is a huge one. Most of us, myself included, are just parenting the way that we were parented as children. And if you had a relatively healthy parent, like I did, then when I'm turning into my mother, I can kind of say it tongue in cheek and roll my eyes and kind of laugh. And, there's some things that I try to do differently with my kids, but for the most part, because I had a healthy childhood, I'm able to, without thinking very hard about it, just through osmosis, like pass that on to my kids. But if the parents that we're working with didn't experience that, then in the same way that you and I are just parenting how we were parented, so are they. And so they're passing down a lot of things that maybe they don't even realize are not healthy. The way that they talk to their kids, the kinds of relationships they allow their kids to witness, the things that they have in their home, like all that. And they might not even realize, like, okay, this is not a great parenting strategy. Of course, we see substance use disorders, social isolation and unmet emotional needs, just this idea of like being alone. I don't have anyone to do this with me. Immaturity, especially in young parents, or just developmentally immature. And then unrealistic expectations. This kind of goes with the lack of parenting knowledge, but I think it's important to point out, if you don't have an appropriate expectation of, for example, what a 2-year-old can do developmentally. My son is 2 right now, and he's in the my do it stage. Everything's my do it. And because I know that that's developmentally appropriate, I like block out time. It's going to take us 20 minutes to get in the car because he wants to do it. If you don't know that, or if you expect him to be able to act like a 6-year-old, then, oh my gosh, get in the car. And it's really easy to understand like how somebody could snap at their kid, or, you spill something and you think that they should be able to hold the cup and they can't, and then it spills, and then because they didn't meet your expectations, it's a lot easier to snap. We see this like in marriage relationships and dating relationships all the time, right? If you have mismatched expectations, then you're a lot more prone to anger, frustration, whatever it is for you. And then last but not least at all are ACEs. So an ACE is an adverse childhood experience. I don't know if you guys know your ACE score. If you don't, I would encourage you can scan this or you can Google it. But ACEs are a set of 10 experiences that the CDC studied and agreed upon in the mid-90s, that if these adverse experiences happen before we're 18, then they have a direct impact on negative long-term outcomes as adults. So things like, let me just pull it up. So things like, did you often or very often see your mother be kicked, pushed, shoved when you were little? Did an adult in the house often or very often struggle with an addiction? Did you often or very often wonder like where your next meal was going to come from? So all of those are adverse childhood experiences. If you don't, okay, thank you, baby. If you don't know your score, I would really encourage you to scan that and look it up. I won't go through them all right now just for the sake of time, but one activity that I really like to do is to go through what my score is, and I'll grow, meaning none of these adverse experiences happened to me before I turned 18. And then if I think about like my kids' parents, or the parents, like the mom that Kaylee referenced in the beginning, when I think about her, what I know of her, the more likely it is for her children to experience abuse or neglect because of all these other things we've talked about. So right off the bat, just because of how I grew up, my children, so think about it, I'm 18, I don't have kids yet. My unborn children were already less likely to experience abuse or neglect because of things that didn't happen to me when I was 18 than this other mom who, by no fault of her own, experienced 7 or 8 of these things, and her kids that hadn't been born yet were right off the bat at a higher risk of abuse or neglect. So I would encourage you to go through there. It'll take you 5 minutes. Do it for yourself, and then do it again for a parent that you worked with, and just what you know about them. Do the same activity for them. And just think about like, okay, where am I and where in them, and how might that impact the way that we're able to parent? How might that impact our children? When we do that, I hope it would build some empathy in us. Empathy is like a muscle, I believe. It's something that we have to exercise. We have to be in the habit of using that muscle, or else it gets really weak and we are out of practice. And so I think it's good to do little activities like this just to kind of exercise that empathy muscle. Okay, so I want to specifically go through some risk and protective factors. So these are factors that were identified by the CDC, by Prevent Child Abuse Georgia, and Georgia State University. They did a study on these several decades ago and identified risk factors, meaning factors that would put a child on increased risk of maltreatment, and then protective factors, meaning factors that would add a layer of protection between a child and potential abuse or neglect. So these are some of the risk factors. I'll let you guys just read them for a second. You'll see that ACE score, the history of parental trauma, community factors. So just based on the neighborhood that you live in, if there's an increased rate of violence or poverty or a higher unemployment rate in the neighborhood that you live in, that has a direct impact on your child's risk level for being abused or neglected. Of course, socioeconomic status. Another big one that I like to point out is this kind of, I don't know if y'all can see my mouse, but halfway down the page, this non-biological transient caregiver in the home. And that is just a fancy way of saying if a parent is constantly relying on someone who's not related to them and doesn't live with them to care for their child, that has a significant impact on their risk level. So one example we talk about a lot with that one is think about a single mom who is working 2 jobs, and her normal babysitter calls out, or whatever her normal childcare plan is, can't come through, or her boss calls and says, I need you to come pick up a second shift. So now she's stuck between 2 choices. I can either not go into work, which is going to have an impact on how much food I'm able to put on the table, which could potentially be neglect, or I'm going to leave my kids with the neighbor down the street that I don't know that well, but she's here and I don't know anything about her, and that's going to increase my child's risk level, which could be neglect. And so it's kind of like, that's where we get into like that. I would never do that. Well, I would never be in that position. And not because I'm a good mom, because of my history and because of my layers of protection, which are just like a born privilege. They're not really anything I did. I've got 12 people I could call on my phone, that could help me in that scenario. Or I have a job where I know I'm going to get to be home with my kids every night. So when we started to think about that, it puts some of these situations in perspective where our phones are ringing going, this kid was found alone in their home overnight. Okay, we're not excusing that. You can't leave a 3-year-old home alone. But we do have to maybe try to have some empathy of what led this parent to make that choice, assuming that most parents are making the best choice that they know how to make at a given moment. It's also important to just note the disproportionate amount of people of color that are impacted by these risk factors. A lot of times the general public thinks one group of people is more neglectful, more abusive, more absent. That's not the case. Black people specifically are disproportionately represented in the child welfare system because these risk factors disproportionately impact their neighborhoods, their families, and all of that. So it's important to kind of combat that as we talk about it. And I'm also think like, what are we doing to perpetuate that, or what are we doing that to help protect against that? Okay, so these are risk factors, and my question is always, how many of these factors have anything to do with how much a parent loves their child? I would argue none of them. How many of them have anything to do with how, quote, good of a parent they are? Probably none. You could probably make an argument. I wouldn't, but you could maybe. So it's just not as simple as it looks. And I know that y'all know this. I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's a good little heart check for us. Okay, so on the flip side, so that we don't leave our lunch hour just depressed, these are protective factors, and these are also data-driven, scientifically proven to protect against abuse and neglect. And these are the 5 that the CDC and PCA Georgia identified. The number 1 is caregiver resilience. Okay, resilience is grit, essentially. When you run up against something hard, do you know I'm gonna make it through? I'm gonna come out the other side. And I think that only comes from the experience that I do make it out the other side. Anytime I've run up against something really hard in my life, it might have knocked me down for a minute, but every time I've been able to get back up and it's never taken me out. So that builds resilience in me, which means I can help my children know when we face hard things, we're going to push through, we're going to make it out. But if you don't have that experience of making it out, if every time you run up against something hard, you're on the street, or your children get taken from you, or you get injured, like then you don't have that resilience. So the ability to have that grit and that resilience and that belief that we're going to make it through, that's a protective factor for children. Social connections. My example is always like, if you had to go, I don't know, to the ER in the middle of the night, I had an emergency. Who could you call to come stay with your children? If you could name more than like 3 people, then your kids are light years ahead of a lot of the families that we're working with. Knowledge of child development. Again, a lot of that just comes from how you were raised, or the access to secondary education. Some of us we're not raised in a way that we want to raise our children, but we have access to other healthy models of families or formal education or trainings like this, where we can learn and gain the tools that we need to provide the childhood for our children that we want. So if you don't have that, then you don't have that protective factor. Social and emotional competence. It's kind of similar to resilience, or empathy. And then concrete support. We talk about BrightPaths a lot sometimes, and we offer parenting classes and home visiting service. We do tons of education and tons of long-term connection with families. But we also just offer concrete resources. Like sometimes families don't need the lecture and the lesson, they just need the diapers. Like they already know that they're not providing what they need for their child and they just need some help. So concrete resources are a protective factor as well. Okay, so this is another assessment. My screen's in the way. We won't do it, but I would also encourage you to do this. This will probably take you 4 minutes. But these are going to list out all of this. This QR code is going to list out all of the risk factors that I mentioned, and then several kind of examples of those 5 protective factors. This is not scientific, okay? They're not all weighted the same. It's just an exercise in understanding and empathy. But you can kind of add up. Okay, if I look at these risk factors, let's say we all babies start at neutral, 0 risk factors, 0 protective factors. That's not true. We know about prenatal care. We know about the family of origin and what you're born into impacts you and all that. But let's just, for the sake of this example, say a baby's born at 0 on a number line. For every risk factor that they have, they would move, I don't know if my screen's mirrored, but they would move to the left. They would move in a negative number. So like parents' lack of understanding of children's needs, parental history of child abuse or neglect. The parents have been abused as children, substance abuse in the family, mental health challenges. The parents are teenagers. If the parents don't have a high school diploma or a GED, all those things would be like -1, -2, -3, -4. And so we look at, if I had a baby right now, all these risk factors on this assessment, my kid would be like a -1. Again, let's take the same mom that Kayla mentioned earlier. What I know about her is her kids would be like a -12, meaning they have 12 risk factors, meaning they're so high risk. And again, none of these really have to do with like how hard that mom is trying, right? Then you go to the other side and there's all these examples of protective factors, and those would move you to the right. Those would move you up a number on this imaginary number line. So do you have a supportive family environment? Do you have 3 people in your phone you could call in an emergency? Is the parent employed? Is the parent 22 years or older? Do you have adequate housing? Do you have access to healthcare? All these things. So again, my child might start at -1 and then has like 15 protective factors. So they'd move all the way up to a +14, meaning they're really, really, really low risk for maltreatment. The mom in this example, her kids are starting at -12, and then she has like 2 or 3 protective factors. So she's only at -9. She's still in the red, meaning that the difference between my kid's risk level and her kid's risk level is whatever the math is on that, 20 imaginary points. And it's not because like I'm this great, perfect mom and she's this terrible mom who's trying to abuse her kids and Netflix is going to make a story about her. It's because of all these environmental factors, these societal factors, these generational factors that are impacting her kids without her even realizing it. So do that activity too. I just think it's really interesting. That one's not scientific. ACEs is a scientific study that has proven this risk factor. That's kind of like our just empathy exercise. Okay, any questions about that? We're gonna move to action, but any questions or thoughts? Okay. All right, so we've got the understanding, we understand why it happens. These little assessments help us build some empathy, hopefully. Let's not just sit there, let's actually move to action. Like, what do we do about it? And I'm looking, I don't know everybody on the call, but the people that I do know are foster parents or work at Uniting Hope, so work in the foster care system. So we'll go with that, for example. Okay, so what do we do about it? Here are some really, 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 really practical examples. These might not work in your case. Think about this for a minute. What would work in your case? Sometimes it's as simple as texting your kid's mom or dad, whoever, grandma, caregiver, and just letting them know, like, hey, I'm on your team. I hope, my goal is that your kids get to go home to you, that they are safe. And I pray that being home with you is the safest option for them. I've literally looked kids' parents in the eye in the courtroom and said, I'm not trying to adopt your baby. I do not want your baby. And then just the wave of like relief that comes over their face. Don't say it if it's not true. But sometimes just communicating with mom, sometimes just sending a picture, like treating our kids' moms like we would treat our regular mom friends. There doesn't have to be this big divide. There is a power, there's a power dynamic at play there. So they are all, whether you want to or not, whether you're the nicest person in the world, there's a power dynamic. People are going to try in court. Your word means more. You literally have their children. Likely you are better off financially. So whether we want to or not, there's a power dynamic. When there's a power dynamic, the person in power has to be the one to reach across the line and say, like, I'm on your team. That the person who does not have the power is never, it would be wildly brave of them to be the ones to reach up and say, can we be on a team? So sometimes just as simple as a text, took this picture of your baby. He's so cute. He looks like you. And like, that's it. I think a lot of times we sweep a lot of things into this, like, for safety purposes catch-all. And my question would be, is it unsafe or is it uncomfortable? So use a Google number if you have to, but I think just sometimes like texting the parent. I'll stop. I get on a soapbox about that. I'm not saying it's easy. It's hard and scary and so awkward, but it makes a huge difference. Speaking up in court, I would go to court every single time for the foster parent. If you're able, get on court every time. Speak if they let you, ask to be sworn in if you have something of value to say and you want it on the record, and then use that time to, yes, give a report on the baby, but use that time to, in front of all these people who are judging literally whether or not this parent is a fit parent, to speak highly of them. It's not your job to judge if they're a fit parent. We don't have that power. I'm glad we don't, but we can say, hey, baby was so excited to see mom. Let somebody else say whether or not that was a good situation or whether or not mom did a good job. But when my kids got home from their visit, they were so thrilled that they got to color with their mom. Like, be the person on that call that is speaking life into them. It will go a long, long, long way. When you send an email update, just CC everybody. Okay, so that's if you're in foster care. If you're not, some other really practical ways that we can kind of be protective factors or bolster protective factors in our community will be to help a neighbor. If you know that there's a neighbor that you have that is gonna have to go in for a second shift, let her know, hey, I'm a background checked babysitter. If you ever get in a bind, please call me. There's a single mom. Hey, if your baby won't stop crying in the middle of the night and you're about to pull your hair out or worse, please call me. If you're in the grocery store and some kid is driving their mom crazy, like, tell her she's doing a good job, or offer to, I don't know, hold her baby. That's weird, but like, just be okay to be uncomfortable, because it really can go a long way. We've all had somebody be that to us. Buy an extra pack of diapers and give it to the clothes closet at UH4C, Uniting Hope, or to BrightPaths, or to the diaper bank, or whoever. Make a donation. There's all these ways that we can help strengthen families, which the science shows keeps kids safe. So there's not a lot we can do about these systemic risk factors, but the protective factors you and I can have a huge impact on with a really small action. So think about in your circle, like, how can you bolster a protective factor for families near you? All right. I'm not saying it always works. I'm not saying every kid's going to reunify. We just will text their mom. But I think it does make a bigger difference than we realize. I've seen it with my own eyes. I know y'all have too. And it also does something in our own hearts. It does something for us when we are able to build a relationship with our kids' parents. It's good for us too. And if I could take my BrightPaths hat off for a minute and put my foster mom hat on, I think the Lord uses that to do more in our hearts than we realize, to humble us, to build empathy, to make us more like Jesus. So I know it's uncomfortable. I literally just got off the phone with my baby's mom and I'm really mad at her, and I still took her call and invited her to the doctor's appointment, and I secretly hope she doesn't come. But I think it's important for our kids, for their families, and for our own hearts. So that's it. I do have to also say, y'all already know this, but I have to put it in here. If you suspect that a child's being harmed, they're in immediate danger, especially in July in the parking lot, it's hot, call 911. If you suspect that a child's being abused, report it to your caseworker or to the hotline. If you run into a family that just needs some help, connect them. Kayla can get you connected to all these places. I'm happy to. But if you know a family needs help and you're not sure how to help them, please reach out. One of us can find a way to help them before a child's harmed, before a family is broken up. So any questions, thoughts, comments? Okay, thank y'all for doing this work too. I know it's exhausting. I get it. I see you. So I appreciate y'all.
Thank you, Sallie. I just got a little emotional as you were sharing, which is not really a surprise, but I'm just seriously, I know the weight that foster parents carry, and it's a heavy weight, but to choose someone else and to try to see the good in them is living like Jesus. And I'm really grateful for you. And I'm grateful for all of our other foster parents that do that too. So sorry to continue to be emotional, but it really matters. And I am really grateful. So thank you for sharing and your knowledge and wisdom in your work, but then also just personally, it really does, I think, make it even more meaningful that you can speak from both parts of you. So thank you so much. And yeah, if anyone does have any questions or want to do this, I'm not a foster parent, but I do love to talk about how to be creative with our neighbors. That's something that my family really cares about too. And we're, buying extra popsicles these days and trying to be really present for some of our neighbors. And so anytime anyone wants to talk about that kind of thing, certainly want to be helpful. So thank you all. And I will email you a certificate for this training, and it will be a full hour of training. And if you have any questions, please reach out.
Thanks, Kayla.
Thanks,
Bye, y'all.
Sallie. Bye.